Okay, let's move to the UK because Prime Minister Boris Johnson's reached a compromise deal with some Tory rebels on a controversial new Brexit bill. The draft legislation would give the government power to override parts of the UK's Brexit agreement and break international law. Well, that's how it's been told to us, Alexander Downer. You're a former High Commissioner and someone very proficient at reading the tea leaves in British politics. Where's this all up to?
Well, the negotiations are reaching their end point between the UK and the EU, and this is part of a negotiating strategy where the UK is making it clear that if the negotiations fail, the simple point is they are not going to allow the EU to establish a trade border between Great Britain, that's England, Scotland and Wales, on the one hand, and Northern Ireland on the other. Northern Ireland, which has a land border with the Republic of Ireland. They are not going to allow that to happen because the British government understandably argue that the EU would be breaking up the UK if they did that. So they've introduced this legislation. It's not going to happen if they reach an agreement with the EU. The legislation will be null and void. But if they fail to reach an agreement, they just want to guarantee that the EU in no way can impose barriers between the mainland of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That's all it's about. So it is a breach of international law because it changes the withdrawal agreement, and the British argument is, well, the EU has reinterpreted the withdrawal agreement in a way that we think is inimical to the unity of the United Kingdom, and so we're going to introduce a law if that's what they do. So it's controversial, but I don't think punters are too fussed about it. They just want Brexit to be done.
Yeah, well, Brexit means Brexit, in the words of the Prime Minister's election campaign. Corey, as we know, the Northern Hemisphere is heading into winter. Boris Johnson's warning a second lockdown would be disastrous for the British economy. Let's have a listen.
A second national lockdown, Julie and I think it would be completely wrong for this country.
Can we afford it, Prime Minister?
And we are going to do everything in our power to prevent it, and can we afford it? I very much doubt that the financial consequences would be anything but disastrous.
Corey, given we know so much more about this virus now than we did back in February, do you expect that the UK will treat it all so differently this time round with what they know?
I certainly hope they do, Peter, because the evidence is that lockdowns like the punitive type of thing that we've seen in Victoria are not any more effective than regular social distancing, common sense approach, proper sanitisation. But also there's this huge economic and social cost that goes with it. Around the world, it's estimated that $11 trillion has been lost, or it's cost, through this coronavirus pandemic. There's a further $10 trillion expected to be wiped off global GDP in the next 12 months. The UK's borne the brunt of it because they didn't look after the vulnerable right at the start. And if you treat the elderly, those with comorbidities, with serious illnesses, if you treat those with the kid gloves that they need in order to not be exposed to this virus, generally anyone under the age of 50 and more likely under the age of 60 can pretty much get around as they need to, use some common sense. Their economies can continue to flourish, and they don't go through the devastating and heartbreaking circumstance that we saw in the UK earlier and we've seen elsewhere. So that's the international evidence is now stacking up that there's a better way to handle it. I hope the experience will lead the UK to making the right decision. Peter?
Alexander, I've got to go to an interview I just had before in a column that he wrote in the Australian Financial Review today. A very senior former economist in the Victorian Treasury has quit after 18 years. He says there's no longer frank and fearless advice. There's no longer the central agencies, which is what Treasury is, interrogating all the other information on something as big as this pandemic, that there's been a complete breakdown of all the sort of public service protocols that you would know from your time in Canberra are absolutely critical. They give the frank and fearless advice, and politicians like you and Corey make the decisions. I found it extraordinary, these revelations. You know, you have a hunch it's coming out of the Premier's office, the politics and the decisions, and the lack of engagement of the bureaucracy. But this is extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole performance of the Victorian government is really a matter of ridicule. I mean, first of all, the curfews. Where was the advice to impose these curfews? And what is the medical advantage of imposing these curfews? Secondly, the extreme lockdown that they have had now in Victoria is only even possible for the Victorian government because the federal government has to pick up most of the bills, which is a terrible failure of the Federation, I'd have to say. These state governments, with their sort of pre-1901 policy of closing off all of the borders and lockdowns of one kind or another, not so much within South Australia, by the way, but in other states and obviously above all in Victoria, I mean, in my view, it's completely reckless. I agree entirely with what Corey has just said, that you need to protect the vulnerable, but you cannot close the economy indefinitely. Let's say there are second waves and third waves and fourth waves. I mean, I would like someone to explain to me what we are going to do when we run out of money, when it isn't possible to borrow money anymore. And if you want examples of countries that have run out of money, I can give you a lot of them, particularly in South America. Countries like Argentina and Brazil and so on have frequently run out of money. And in the end, we will. So these policies are not sustainable.
I reckon you need to find yourself a seat and come back, Alexander Downer. Come over to Victoria. I reckon you might get the top job. Alexander Downer, Corey Bernardi, thank you for your time.